Greetings and welcome. Welcome back to the second part of my autobiography. Last time I mentioned about my younger days, from ages 1 to 14. During my younger days, I would often sit behind a match angler named Larry Powell. Now, Larry was a fantastic angler. He became my mentor into match fishing. Larry was an exceptional angler and perhaps 10 years ahead of his time. Nobody could really live with him in the South Wales circuit. He probably won more matches than anyone else, especially in the Welsh history of angling. Not just on the River Taff, but also on the Roath Park Lake, which is a local venue, East Dock, West Dock in Cardiff, and as far afield as like the Bristol Avon, the Gloucester Canal, and the Warwickshire Avon. Now, I was very fortunate to befriend him as a youngster. How I met Larry as a teenager, it was fortuitous that I was travelling back from a local match being held on East Dock in Cardiff, and I had all my tackle on my back, my box, remember the old wicker basket boxes and straps and hold all. Anyway, I was riding my bike and I sort of toppled over and right behind me it was Larry and another chap called Ron Cousins. Now, Ron Cousins used to be the South Wales correspondence for the Anglers Mail and the local South Wales Echo. Unfortunately, Ron passed away a year or two ago now. But anyway, Larry and Ron, they basically helped me up off the road and give me a lift back, all my tackle back to the house. Anyway, after that, me and Larry, we got together, and I quite often. We used to go fishing together then. I became very good friends with Larry, and then he taught me some very important rules. And he was a firm believer, in preparation. And often he would show me how he would clean his maggots, for example. He would buy his maggots from the local store. He'd put them in a tights, a woman's tights, and he'd put washing liquid up on them, and then he'd wash them under the tap. He would then, squeeze the water out and clean them off in warm water, and then he dried them in soft bran. And his maggots were superb. He would often colour his bait as well, and in those days we used to use a dye called crystal dye. Unfortunately, it's banned now because it had carcinogenic effects, cause cancer. But the dye was really one of the favourite dyes for colouring the maggots. And the same with the pinkies. He would do the same with the pinkies. And again, he would dye them up, and they always seemed that bit soft, after he'd washed them and put them in bran. Maybe that had an effect, I don't know. But anyway, his ground bait as well. He also used to. We used to use just pure brown crumb in them days, and he would get them from the local bakery off a friend of his, John Griffiths, who used to work in the market. Anyway, he used to buy it, and he used to sieve it off in different grades. And when he was sieve it off, and the preparation, as I said, it was phenomenal at the time, and that's why perhaps he was, years ahead of everybody else, because the amount of time and effort he used to put into his bait. Now, Larry was a bit of an extrovert and a joker, and wherever he went, I remember a time when falling into the river, in the River Taff, in a competition, and he swam underwater, and underneath the float of one of his fellow anglers, Sid Collict from the Rhondda, was unaware, and he was just fishing away, watching his float, and all of a sudden, Larry just jumped out of the water. And basically, poor old Sid nearly had a heart attack. Unfortunately, Sid did die later on in life with a heart attack, but I'm not saying that. I was part of it, but that was funny. But it was an amusing moment, and we laughed about that for many, many years afterwards. Anyway, back in the 70s, Larry, being a front runner, would take advantage of his jovial attitude and travel to Ireland quite a lot with the Welsh Federation of Anglers. I remember a time when we went to fish a home international competition. Larry would stand on a chair at the Irish bar and tell Irish jokes. It nearly caused riots because it was a little bit unsettling at the time because the IRA enthusiasts, sort of frequented the bars in that sort of area. And anyway, I was starting to get like Larry in a way with other members of the team and the club. I remember a time we stayed in a cottage in Ireland, and I went into Alban Ward, his name was, again from the Rhondda. He was, no, from Ebervale, that's right, Ebervale. I remember powdering with talcum powder while he was sleeping, and he woke up in the middle of it, and he chased me all around the hotel anyway. Good old days. But I remember another angler where I used to joke around with Alan Rees. Unfortunately, Alan's passed away. He was a local butcher in Cardiff. Not a bad angler. He wasn't top of the tree, but anyway, I remember he was sleeping on the ferry and we were going there, and I squirted all this soap all over his face, shaving soap, and while he was sleeping, and then as he was snoring with his mouth open, he sort of sucked some of it in it, and he woke up coughing and choking. I was no angel in them days. Hopefully, I grew out of that, of course, at a later stage. Anyway, the Welsh Federation of Anglers, they were the stepping stone for further international duties a couple of years later. Now, John Mayers, he was the head of the WFCA at the time, the Welsh Federation of Coarse Anglers. And at that time, I think the Federation was boasting over 1,000 members. And, in every coarse fishing club in Wales was a member. Anyway, good old days with Larry and the Welsh Federation when it was formed, and we travelled together fishing many matches in his mini car. And I remember the old Mini. I don't even remember the old Mini, especially the older guys. You remember the old Minis. His wiper blades weren't working, and anyway, he tied a bit of string on it, and I was on the passenger side, and it would go one way, and I'd have to pull the string the other way to make the wipers work. And we travelled down to West Wales to fish a match like that. Crazy. Anyway, we were like fools and horses team then. Me being Rodney, I think. I did help him on his marketplace. He used to be a market trader, just like Del Boy. And I remember selling dishes, buttered dishes, and they weren't worth a lot. They're worthless, yet it was good fun, And I remember Gary Evans, the local tackle shop, would squirm every time he went into his shop. I remember a time when Larry placed his private parts in one of the tackle reps' hands as he held it behind his back, and not realising what he was doing, and it was murder there. Another time, Larry, I remember him. Unfortunately, Larry started to take to drink a little bit then, and he swam the whole width of Roth Park Lake, which is quite a long way, and right in the middle of a match just to cool off because he was getting hot, and he got back out and he still won the match anyway. I remember another time with Larry, and this was, lots of things happen in fishing, coincidence and funny things. And I remember we both fished next to each other in a little knock-up match. And we weren't that far apart, I don't think. Anyway, my float went under and his float went in under at the same time. And now this Butang pond up in the Merthyr, it had loads of gudgeon in it, and I believe the record gudgeon come there once many years ago. Don't quote me on that, but I know there was some big gudgeon in there. Anyway, we both struck, and at the same time, and we both reeled in, and our hooks were in the same mouth of the gudgeon. How that happened, I don't know. I could only presume that one of the lines must have gone over and run down and hooked it at the same time. But we had to toss up to see whose fish it was. On another occasion, we used to fish the Wye quite a lot as well in those days. We used to be a member of a club called Butte Anglers, and they used to travel every weekend up to the River Wye, during the winter, um, they had concessions to fish salmon beats, and as long as they could bring the fish back, then that's what they used to do. Anyway, I remember with Larry, and I think it was about 25, 30 anglers. We'd all jump on the coach first thing in the morning, freezing to death it was in the winter, and we had some great entertainment. We'd be playing cards and things like that. And I remember one time it was so cold. I had a hot flask of coffee and I poured it down my Wellington boots just to keep my feet warm. It was that bad. Of course, that was long before the old thermals and that came out. Anyway, the Y we used to fish up at Bute Wells. We used to call it the wild Y, where we used to catch huge bags of chub on large pieces of bread flake. And when maggot was allowed, we used to catch the taste then. These days were real cocktails. They were 10 to 12 ounces a piece. And we used to catch them on the bronze maggot that Larry used to colour up. Now, in those days, in the 60s, the River Wye was mostly game fishing, as I said, and the ruling was that we would have to bring the fish back, and so in the back of the coach they used to put oxygenated tanks, and we used to put all the dace and the chub, anything caught, in there, and we'd travel back with them alive, and we would release them into the Taff, and usually by Llandaff Weir, which is above Bigsweir, which I mentioned in my other part of the blog autobiography. Anyway, that was at Llandaff Weir. Now, Larry was only in his 40s at that stage, and unfortunately, his wife left him, and she moved out of the country. He never saw his daughters again. Now, whether this was the reason he became addicted to alcohol, I don't know. I'll never know. But anyway, however, he suffered the consequences, taking bottles of brandy to a fishing match. And now, of course, Larry, who was miles ahead of every other angler in those days, and he certainly could have, in my opinion, become a world champion. Obviously, if the world championships were around in them days. But anyway, his untimely death through cirrhosis of the liver, just by drinking too much. It's a great loss. And the saddest thing, really, for me, is that I missed his funeral. And they tell me that he was so popular that at his funeral wake at the cemetery in the church, you couldn't get in. There were so many people. People were queuing outside. Anyway, that was my fond memories of Larry. Leaving school at the age of 15, which was, in them days, we could leave school at 15. I was attracted to a business that appealed to my interest in fish. A new tropical fish shop had just opened in town. South Wales Aquarium, it was called. It was the first of its kind in South Wales, and although I worked part-time at a local fishing tackle shop in Cardiff, Angler Supplies in Penarth Road, and it was right close to where I lived, but I was only working for really pocket money at the time. But when this new opportunity, this new job came up, I thought, oh, it's irresistible. I'd love to learn how to keep fish in aquariums, and and how to feed them, and and the whole nature of keeping fish. Certainly, it taught me in the long term to respect fish, because fish have got characters. I know it's daft to say, but fish do they certainly got traits. Anyway, through the studying of fish keeping, I believe it made me a much better angler. Studying fish, especially the way they feed in particular, gave me an insight on how fish responded to different colours, movements, light, dark, temperature, for example, and bottom feeding fish compared with top feeding fish, and shoal feeding fish. There's dominant fish species, plus there's lots more that I learned, and in particular how eels, they gather food in their mouth, almost like a bird would gather in its beak before they actually digested it. And this probably accounts for a lot of missed bites when we're fishing for eels, because they're not actually taking the bait. We're striking while it's still in their beak. Anyway, I also learned how fish responded to live foods, which give me an insight into bloodworm and joker and worm. Daphne was another natural food that fish feed on, especially when they're young. Tubifex is another live bait which we used. And then there was static baits, that the fish used to, especially the bigger fish like the carp, and that we used to fish, feed them with corn and meat, and and how the fish would respond to it. Um, Regrettably, the business was acquired and taken over by new owners after my 4th year in business. Um, Unfortunately, they expected me to work every weekend instead of my fortnightly routine, which I would take off, obviously, to go fishing. Now, the funny thing is, at that time, I was fortunate enough to have qualified at the age of 19 to a prestigious fishing event called the Woodbine Classic, later called the Embassy Challenge. Um, Basically, I went through a free trip to Ireland, and to take the time off to travel to Ireland for the grand final, obviously trying to get permission of the owners, and there was a decision that they decided no, I couldn't do, and it would cost me the job. Now, obviously, I took the job. I went fishing, and that was it. When I come back, you know. Um, but thinking back to the match in Ireland, seeing some of the top anglers in that era, including Robin Harris, John Dean, Colin Golding from the West Country. It was like going to Madame Tussauds museum and seeing all these match fishing heroes, in real life. It certainly left an impression for me for the future. Anyway, arriving back from home from that, I didn't do any good, by the way, in the match, but it was a great learning curve for me. Um, Now, regrettably, arriving back home, I was asked by the new owners, and it was called Baildon Water Gardens near Somerset. They acquired the business, and basically, with no job to go back to, I suppose it allowed me a bit more freedom to go fishing on every weekend then. And now, because of my experience in the sales um, field, I decided to follow a career in sales at that time. And I went into all sorts of jobs, including insurance, double glazing, selling, and I even joined an insurance company called Wesleyan and General. And the funny thing was that the owner or the manager of the office, he was actually from Manchester, and he was a keen fisherman. Um, he did actually play. Funny enough, it's coincidence. He actually played for Cardiff City as well as a goalkeeper. When he first came down. Anyway, we got on great, like a house on fire, and we both started going fishing together. Which reminds me as well of something that happened um, when we both went fishing together. Terry, Terry Scott, his name was. We went up the river, on the river at a place called Bigswear. This is the lower part of the Wye, and we went there catching some chub. And anyway, I fished the bread flake, which I learned from Larry, up at the top part of the Wye, and we used it on the bottom part, and it worked quite well. Used a big chunk of bread, on a size 4 hook, massive hooks, I know. And anyway, I landed a nice little chub, about £2. We put him on the scales and weighed it. Oh, that's nice. Anyway, next thing I hooked another chub, and I got it in. It was a massive fish. It was at least 4 times the size, easy. In fact, it was so big round its girth I couldn't get my hands around it. And anyway, when we tried to weigh it, it sort of wriggled and slipped, went down the river bank and into the river. And You know, I think at the time the record was only about £8, the chub record, and I honestly believe that could have been a record, but I'll never know now. It's the one that got away. Yeah. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed the second part of this autobiography, and please, any comments, leave them below. I will be going into the next stage of the early years. As I say, got a long way to go yet before we get to the World Championships yet, but everything I tell you, it was a big learning curve, and I suppose in a way it set me up ready for to become world champion and to compete at the highest level. So as I say, stay in tune, come back on the next one, and either give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but please leave a comment. You can share the video. I'd love you to share it. More people view it, obviously better for me. I don't get much advertising revenue off these YouTubes, but you know, there's other auxiliary things that help me survive. Don't forget, if you want to buy the hard copy, you're more than welcome. Amazon do them, and you can even get them on Kindle and ebook. So there you are. I'll leave a link below, so in case you want to buy the book. I will be reviewing the book again shortly. I'll be, you know, there's a few things that I might add to it, but we'll see. Anyway, all the best, tight lines. See you next time.